So begins this piece of writing, a sentence pulled out of a metaphoric hat so as to throw just any old thing out in order to have the next sentence restricted to manage to build off of it. Not unlike what it must take to build a stone structure out of nature's own rocks, not those that have been cut by man to be blocks. But indeed I do have a structure in mind I want this writing to build into. Whether or not I achieve that, well, that is a matter that I will find out for myself. Therefore, it can be said that this piece of writing is a quest. Well, that seems to me fitting because the intent of this writing is to detail a quest I'm currently on. It is a difficult quest in both regards. The steamy night heat I'm experiencing is causing my hand to sweat, and if I let it rest upon this notebook paper, then the paper will become too damp for the pen to work properly. Therefore, I'm forced to try and hover my hand away from the paper, which causes discomfort and also sloppy handwriting. I have thoughts of perhaps waiting a bit to try and write, but that would leave me with this purposeless solitude in this junk-piled vehicle, which is in a church parking lot without permission, and a blown-out, shredded tire wrapped in wire and rubber tatters around a bent rim. I'm resting peacefully now with the Lord, having stated those former things, and I will let the Lord talk a bit. That conversation went well. Not more than 10 minutes passed between the last sentence and this one, and during that intermission, a man named Paul pulled up aside of me and gave me permission to sleep here for at least tonight. With that, let me now tell you the name of this town, Round Rock, Texas, about 20 miles from Austin. That town name wasn't even in mind when I wrote in the opening paragraph about a non-block shaped stone structure. Now I will rest some more. This paragraph takes shape from a new location on a new day at about noon. I'm now writing at the public library in downtown Round Rock. I am able to rest my hand on the page, and I am more comfortable in all ways thanks to the air-conditioned building. My oh my, what a blessing and luxury public libraries present for a destitute, wayfaring traveler. A virtual oasis they are, and on a hot, clear day like this one, it's really not all that metaphorical to state. In fact, on that note, I want to clarify the vagueness of this writing by defining my intent. I want this piece of composition notebook literature to amount to an account of this particular quest, which began on Thursday, June 15th, 2023 in Morgantown, West Virginia. I had no particular place in mind to go when I put gas in the Kia Sorento. I only had about $37 to my name, and after adding gasoline, less than $10. But things weren't altogether dismal on the account of the fact that I'm currently drawing unemployment, which gets added electronically in the amount of $182 each week. Typically, I file my weekly claim early in the AM of Sunday and receive the boost to my balance in the early AM of Tuesday. I had began working on a poster for comedian Joe List while at my son's duplex 3-bedroom apartment in Morgantown, but given my lack of funds, it became dubious as to whether or not I even had gas money to get to the Columbus shows where he was scheduled to perform on Friday and Saturday. Even if I were to make it there, I wouldn't have had the ability to make prints to sell. Therefore, the only hopeful outcome would be to either get a signature from Joe List on my original 11x17 painting or give it to him as a gift. Neither of those options seemed all that fruit-bearing. Just 5 days earlier, I had been at a comedy show near Allentown, PA, where I was able to pay for my ticket to see the show, get 3 laminated prints made, and ultimately meet Louis J. Gomez, who was the subject of my poster design. He and I had a brief but good conversation, during which time he expressed his approval of my poster design. I numbered 3 laminates, and I gifted the number 1 print to Louis. He said that he knew precisely where he would hang it in his home. I got the other 2 laminates signed by him, and that persuaded me that a long drive back to Morgantown would be triumphant return from a victorious battle, and I would give each of my sons a signed poster trophy that would testify to them that their old pop wasn't a total failure after all. So rather than go to the Dead shows, which were scheduled to take place in Philadelphia as I had originally planned, I headed straight back to Morgantown. However, my sons were not as delighted by the signed prints as I had hoped they would be. After all, they are not especially Louis J. Gomez fans, but they did at least hear me out, and as I told them some details about the experience. Even though a part of me feels that the most logical place to be is with my sons, the fact concerning that circumstance is that it's not my choice to make. Even though at times I shared healthy interactions with both of them, there was an overwhelming knowledge that being an uninvited house guest at my son's place needed to end. So it was I hit the road in that Kia on US 119 North. I soon began to hear a sound in one of the wheels I hadn't heard before whenever I would go around curves. I turned westward off of 119 at some point and found myself headed towards Burton, West Virginia. I made a brief stop there in Burton and took time to pick up some litter from the little community park there. I considered possibly heading up to Moundsville to visit the, quote, Indian mounds, but instead I elected to cross the Ohio River at New Martinsville and began heading south. There is a road that follows alongside of Ohio, and it provides the Ohio River, and it provides a rather scenic travel. I considered where I might find a place to make my camp since gasoline was getting less in the tank, and I was going to have 4 days to wait for my unemployment money. At a roadside rest area, I took a look at the map, and so I considered the Wayne National Forest. But instead, I stayed right along the river until I reached a place on the side of the road to pull off and sleep on the Ohio side of the river across from Point Pleasant. The next morning, I continued driving, but as the tank dipped below 1/4 full, the urgency to find a better place for an extended camp became clear. I was lucky to find such a place just outside of Proctorville, Ohio, which is just across the river from Huntington, West Virginia. It was down a dirt road just about 50 yards off the roadway and right beside a meandering stream that flows into the Big Ohio. It's called Indian Guyam Creek. I come to discover that Proctorville had a small public library, so I made use of the luxury in order to keep my devices charged up, during which time I read some books about the Ohio River. Still, had service on my telephone at this point, so during the evenings I watched my typical podcast viewing lineup. Still, even though the situation was not without its comforts, I mainly looked forward to Tuesday so that I could press onward. I was completely out of money by Friday evening due to a $7 erroneous charge against my account. Therefore, I had to scrape for food. One Sunday, I completely cleaned out the Kia so I could search under the seats for change. Sunday also happened to be Father's Day, and perhaps it came as Father's Day blessing that I happened to find over $9. I walked a 3/4 mile walk to Proctorville and bought some tuna salad and bread and feasted on several good sandwiches. My primary pastime, aside from the library and podcast on my phone, was clearing out the debris and weeds around the vehicle in order to transform this spot into a proper camp spot, which it had not been at the time of my arrival. By Monday, I was very anxious for my cash to be added to my debit card. Proctorville, Ohio was no place I'd ever heard of before, and by no means my destination. Yet it was not a bad place. There was a gas station in town where I could fill up my gallon jugs with clean drinking water. I even took my small cooler there filled with dirty socks and did a laundry wash behind the gas station without seeming to raise an eyebrow. Also, there at Proctorville, there is a large bridge of interesting modern architecture that made a very pleasant scenic walk over to Huntington, West Virginia. I was very disappointed to find out that no money had been added to my account on Tuesday morning. I had paced my spending with the confidence that it would be. So on Tuesday, I was now clear broke again. It had been an oversight of ignorance that I had failed to know that Monday had been a federal holiday honoring Juneteenth. So I had to kill a lot of time with a hungry stomach, and ultimately led to me searching for dumpsters behind a handful of fast food places located there. A heavy-set young man was taking out garbage at McDonald's, and hunger drove me to have the boldness to ask if it so happened that there was any fresh food in one of the bags he was carrying. He answered, "Unfortunately not. Why, are you hungry?" "Yes, a bit," I replied, not wanting to over-exaggerate my situation, which, although it was very uncomfortable, it certainly was not dire. "Here, man, here's $4. Get yourself a couple McDoubles," he suggested. I thanked him with gratitude and followed his instructions precisely, and the 2 McDoubles did indeed satisfy my hunger. So to bed I went on Tuesday night with the hope of waking up on Wednesday with money on my card. However, once more, my hopes were dashed and no money was on my account. As it so happened, not only was this Juneteenth week, but also the week of West Virginia Day. Therefore, once more, hunger was in the belly. The only satisfaction for it this time was found in a trash bag pulled out of a Taco Bell dumpster that had a sizable amount of tortilla chips in it, as well as a bag of nacho cheese that was mostly empty, but I was able to scrape out some remnants. Other free finds came from walking the road. I found a tobacco vaporizer and a charging pod that proved valuable in keeping my phones, I have a couple, charged up. Alas, when I woke on Thursday morning, I finally had money on my card, so I filled up the gas tank and headed toward the new sub-destination of this journey, Burton, Kentucky. Firstly, however, I went to the biggest town in Floyd County to inquire at the library whatever bit of information I might be able to. Pardon yet another break in the linear movement of this chronicle for me to state that today's date is July 16th, and the time is approximately 12:30 p.m. I am presently riding in the shade of a pine tree on a gravel road running between a property stated by a sign to be a laboratory that is surrounded by a chain-link fence, and on the other side of this dirt road is a steel rail fence that encloses a much larger property that contains in the midst of it a large lawn and a large rectangular two-story building with each level appearing to be about 20 foot in height. Given its appearance, a large amount of glass, and curtainless windows, it appeared to be a corporate office building. Seeing that this road, which runs about 1/4 mile in length from Chisholm Trail Street and terminates at railroad tracks, clearly is rarely used, and that it has on each side unintended weed growth, which some people have seen fit to do some illegal dumping within, it would provide to me a suitable spot for relocation from the church parking lot. For as soothing as forestated Paul had been the first night at the church parking lot, he was equally repelling on the second night when he declared that I needed to move on. So at about 10:30 p.m. on Friday, the 14th of July, I drove my Kia on its rim with the shredded rubber remnants of a blown out tire smacking all around the wheel housing as it rolled bumper